So welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to this Zoom meeting. It's a wonderful privilege to have Sarah with us, Sarah French, who's Director of Operations for Rocha International. Rocha is a Christian conservation charity, but Sarah's done so many things. I can't say all the things she's done, but she's got a wealth of experience in project management, ecotourism, forestry, lecturing in geography and international development, working in consultancy with different organizations worldwide. And now she lives in Geneva and is the Director of Operations for Rocha. So she's going to tell us a little bit about the work of Rocha around the world, but also help us to think about some of the issues to do with caring for the environment and what practical steps we might be able to take. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah in a moment, but let's first say a prayer. Loving God, we thank you for the wonderful world you have created and for the call to be wise and humble stewards of all that you have made. Be with us this evening as we listen and learn, think and share ideas together. Strengthen our commitment to taking practical steps as individuals and as a church to better care for your creation, love our neighbours and honour you. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Okay,
Sarah, over to you.
Can anybody hear me for a start? Am I the right volume?
Yes.
Good. Even those eating their meals hopefully can eat quietly. So thank you very much. Instead of coming to you in Berne, I'm doing this by magic and technology. I'm meeting by Zoom. It's not my favourite sort of meeting on a Zoom. I do rather a lot of this. At least you're the size that I can see you. When there's lots and lots, everybody's sort of minuscule little faces. So thank you all for coming here tonight. Later on, there'll be a time for discussion. We want to discuss later. And you can have this PowerPoint so you can play with it later. So without further ado, I just have to say thank you for a donation you also made to Rocha International recently. So that's quite important. So the theme is actually based, the season of creation, is the Jubilee for the Earth. Now I'll just find it, I'll share my screen. So this may take a little while. Okay, so this is the theme, Jubilee for the Earth, New Rhythms and New Hope. This was an ecumenical decision to have this as the title for this season of creation, and it was before any COVID was ever thought about. So the thought of rest and restoration amid all the crises that we are shaken by every day, wildfires and David Attenborough on BBC, on the whole programme on extinction, and WWF on a huge report just out. But we've got to have some hope for what we're doing. And Rocha International's strapline, if you can see it's very tiny at the bottom there, is actually conservation and hope. And so I'm involved in the next few slides. Rocha, just in case you didn't know, founded in 1983. It's an interdenominational Christian organisation. It's inspired by God's love, engages in scientific research, community-based conservation projects, environmental education, theological training and advocacy. In fact, quite a lot of things, as you can see. But the basic thing is it is a creation care organisation. We care for God's creation. We work in Africa. You can see Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya and South Africa. We work in the UK, Netherlands, France, Portugal, Switzerland, Finland and Lebanon. We work in India, Australia, New Zealand and the Philippines. Hasn't been put on there yet, but that's a new place we're working in. Also in Canada, USA, Peru and Brazil. So as I said, why do we care for creation? It's because the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And unfortunately, what's happened is people do think it is theirs and not the Lord's, and they have plundered and made a bit of a mess of things. So as you'll see later on, we'll find that the everything you hear in the news is mostly to do with this broken relationship with nature. So you recognise this man, David Attenborough. He goes around to lots and lots of different big events now. An amazing elder of wisdom in the conservation world. And he has said that the natural world is not just a matter of beauty, interest and wonder, but a coherent ecosystem on which we depend for every breath we take, every mouthful of food we take. And then you can make a huge long other list as well. And moving on from that, considering how important and valuable our earth is, give you some context, let's set the scene. So we can talk about global footprint. And you can see that in all the data around, reports every single year, that the high-income countries have a footprint more than 5 times greater than that of low-income countries. We currently use the equivalent of 1.7 planets to support our activities. Now, I've had a bit of a shock over the last week when I've been updating my slides. Some of these are from another time, last year, and it used to say 1.6 planets, and now it says 1.7 planets. And you might have heard of Overshoot Day, Earth Overshoot Day. Now, that is a time when we've actually used up the planet's resources, and it was a difference. There was a difference this year. By 3 weeks, a 9.3% change. It was delayed by 3 weeks. Now, you might think that's a good thing. Well, it was a good thing, but it was not done by design. It was done by disaster. It was done by COVID. And as you can see, the actual president of the Global Footprint Network, which they actually are based in Geneva, he said, true sustainability that allows all to thrive on Earth can only be achieved by design, not disaster. And Inge Anderson, who used to be the CEO of IUCN, the World Conservation Union in Gabon, is now the CEO of UNEP, based in Nairobi. And she has said visible positive impacts are but temporary because they come on the back of tragic economic slowdown and human distress. So further into COVID-19, you see lots of stuff about it. We are bombarded every day if you wanted to see it on the news. But some of the factors why some of these diseases are increasing. So this is diseases transmitted from animals to humans, and it's called zoonosis. It's easy to remember because it's zoo and nose, so that's how I remember it. So deforestation and other land use changes makes a difference as to where the animals are, where they're coming at with humans, where they can't live anymore. Antimicrobial resistance, so we're talking about use of antibiotics, makes a huge difference. Intensified agriculture and livestock production, illegal and poor regulated wildlife trade, and then climate change is one that you will be very familiar with. There's been a new report out just this last week called the Living Planet Report by WWF. They do one every year. And each year I read it, and each year it gets to say more about the catastrophic impacts that are happening. So this is a statement by the Director General of WWF International, who happens to be in the offices next to mine in Berne. And this report underlines how humanity's increasing destruction of nature is having catastrophic impacts. And it's not only on wildlife populations, but also on human health and all aspects of life. Biodiversity is one of those words you see kicked about. Again, what does this report say about biodiversity? Global monitored populations of mammals, birds, amphibians and reptiles, so we're talking, and fish, we're talking about vertebrates, have fallen by 68% between 1970 and 2016. Now, when I wrote this last year, it said 60%. And in 2 years, it's now 68%. And then the fact that you've seen probably quite a lot about is that 1 million species are threatened with extinction. There are about 8 million in total, so it's an eighth of everything, eighth of animals, plants, everything is threatened with extinction. This is a friend of mine. She's called Stella Simroy, and she's on our Council of Reference. She's high up in the Convention of Biodiversity in Kenya, and a lovely lady involved in lots of different work with conservation and communities. And here we can see that the loss of biodiversity and related ecosystem services impacts the poor most directly. And what she has said is that it is, when you look at a forest, or you look about where a community lives and you look about how they live, it's the forest that they live by. It's actually their pharmacy. They don't go to shops, they go to the forest. It's their store. They go and get non-timber products, so berries, fruit from the trees. They go and get mushrooms from the forest. And it's the rural poor that depend directly on these things, these natural resources. And so it's their fuel station. They also get bits of trees, they cut down branches. It's their power company for that reason. And it's their water company, because when you have plants growing, it captures the water better than a desert, shall we say. And the question that she always asks whenever I hear her talk is, what would happen to you if these things were removed from your local neighbourhood? In other words, your supermarkets, everything where you buy things is taken away. Climate change, one of those other big things that we hear about within biodiversity, climate change, is all of these words: emissions, ecological prevention, global temperature rises, fuel pollution. In fact, the word that really sums it up is called a climate emergency these days, not just climate change. And climate chaos, because nobody really knows whether it's going to get hotter or colder, or what's happening with the weather. It affects everything, every living thing, all the species, land and sea. It affects all the migration patterns of birds, insects and other animals. And a huge thing is the timing of planting, the seasons. So when I'm in Africa and I'm talking to somebody in Kenya, they're saying, we planted last year and then the weather changed and all the plants died. We don't know when to plant anymore. The rains, you cannot depend on them anymore. So it affects crops and it affects what people can eat. It's having an overwhelmingly negative impact on human health. And the truth is, it hits the world's poorest communities first and worst, and it isn't their fault. You will be very familiar with this young lady who's now back at school. She's had her year off, Greta Thunberg. In her year off, she managed to draw sort of 4 million to strikes and many more to other things as well. A catalyst, an amazing person, and it took this young girl to do that. She's spoken at the UN. There's pictures of her all over the place, meeting the Pope, all sorts of places. But through her crusade for what she thought and what she's done is amazing. And that goes to show that no one is too small to make a difference. That's you and me. We can make a difference. Rocha has worked in lots of countries, and I'll just give you a few highlights of where we've worked and what we've done. So this is sort of a before and after. This is before and after in the Amik wetland in the Bekaa Valley. This is in the 1990s, a very dry area where normal shoot birds and do a lot of hunting and do what you like basically in this area. That's how it was in Lebanon. When Rocha worked there for quite a few years, And what's happened is they've worked to conserve it, to restore it to the wetland it used to be. And with it, all the animals have come back, and they work with the community, so people aren't shooting eagles and other animals like that. And it's made a huge difference to how people think, how people act, and to the wildlife. Another before and after slide would be Woolfields in Southall. I visited in 2013. I saw a piece of land in a housing estate looking a bit like this. Loads of rubbish absolutely everywhere. And a group from Rocha, UK got together and they worked incredibly hard, and they opened it in 2016. They use it for environmental education, and I was there 2 years ago, and it really does look like this. It's a beautiful spot, places to sit, to think, there's places to learn, there's it's used by lots of schools and by churches. That's a before and after, and that's made a difference to the community there. It's restored a place, and it gives rest to people. Another place, zooming around the world, is Ghana. This is Climate Stewards. This was a group of school in Damango in Ghana, planting trees. They're very tiny. They're those little sticks you can see. This is 2007. And then 2013, those are the same little sticks. This is climate mitigation by planting trees, and it's increasing the biodiversity. It's restoration, and a lot of these trees are also, because it's in a school area, they've got lots of fruit on them, and they're nourishing for the children, for their dinners as well. Zooming now to Kenya, we practice farming God's way. This is a conservation agriculture, in another word. It focuses on increased food production and addresses issues of biodiversity conservation. This is in a place called Dekacha, and we work with communities who are living in a place where the soil productivity is pretty low. Their food product security is really very questionable. Droughts, food prices. Kenya isn't a very stable place the last few years. So this really helps a community to survive. And we work with, as a lot of other agencies work as well, with faith-based organisations. And we work with support agriculture. So it's mulching, it's crop rotation, it's not using chemicals unless really, really necessary. It's praying over the land. We also do farming Allah's way with Muslims, and we get somebody else to do the Allah part, who comes in and does that part. And because a lot of places we work have many different faiths, and we work with everybody in the best way that we can. And it has made a huge difference. And it's not just for their food security and for crops. This area is an area where there are some endangered species. There's the Sokoke Scops owl that you only find in the Sokoke forest, which is there. And there's also something called the golden-rumped elephant shrew, which is about size of a chihuahua, very much fatter than a chihuahua, and it has a bright yellow bottom, and they're quite rare. I've seen them a few times just walking down the path. Amazing things, and they only live there. So if people go into the forest and cut down wood and use all their resources in an unsustainable way, make charcoal, because they don't have any other ways of getting money, then these animals will disappear off the face of the earth. So it's all linked in. So we're doing looking after protecting globally threatened species and biodiversity, and working with people. And to do with farming God's way, you get more butterflies, other insects, flowers, birds, different animals. And this is a way of looking after God's creation, the purpose he had for it. Another before and after. This is in Uganda, and Evans is fetching his family water from a ditch, very common in a lot of places in Uganda. And we work providing and working with communities to make biosand water filters so that that water he takes, which as you can see is quite muddy colour, and put it through this filter and out comes clean drinking water. So we don't just work in conservation, we work in development as well, and you have to work in both. It's a holistic way of working. Another quick move to the beach. We work on the coast in Kenya. And again, this is the Araboko-Sokoke forest. And we work with schools. So this is educating, environment education. And the way it's actually paid for is from ecotourism. So people who stay in hotels in Watamu and Malindi are paying a percentage of their choice. And it goes to visits the children to the coast to learn all about the different environment. And a lot of these children won't have come to the coast. They'll be something like 20 kilometres inland and they'll never have been to the coast. So this is it's trying to link up the forest through the agricultural land to the mangroves to the sea as one big area because it's all related in a food web. The money also goes to pay for sponsored children for education. And there are different children that are in different classes that are sponsored for their secondary school education with a bias towards girls because they're the ones women make the most difference in development goals. But they have to get certain grades. It involves their parents. The parents have to sign documents. They're not going to cut trees down. They work with Rocha to learn different new skills. So it's a whole holistic sort of community program. And then the last one, just to give you a glimpse of another sort of work that we do, is advocacy. Now, this is quite a huge thing at the moment. This is in Ghana. These men have walked 95 kilometres carrying the water on their heads from where they live to Accra to show that the water is that important and they do not want bauxite mining in their forest. So Attawa is a forest. It is a site of international importance for biodiversity. It harbours about 100 species that are threatened or near threatened with extinction. So it's globally important. And what has happened is that the Chinese have paid $13 billion to the government, who have said thank you very much in Ghana, to open a bauxite mine in Attawa Forest. And it's a forest reserve, so it hasn't quite got national park status. It was going to be gazetted. It got stopped by this activity. And so now Rocha is campaigning along with the Dutch government and a few other governments and some other NGOs. And we have taken the Ghanaian government to court about this because this is also the watershed for water in Accra, which is the capital. So 5 million residents get their water from this forest where there are 3 big rivers that come through from down there. So sadly, we've been fighting for quite a way of time and energy and around the world. There's been protests and campaigns, some music, some film, all sorts of things, but we've had to take them to court, which is dangerous. There are lots of death threats and all sorts of things happening to my colleagues in Ghana at the moment. So we do advocacy. We don't go out to look for it. It seems to come to see us. Eco Church, that's where you know what it's all about. So you are part of this tectonic shift in Christian thinking. This is what Rowan Williams said at the opening of Eco Church. So he said, Eco Church is a tectonic shift in Christian thinking through which environmental concerns will embed more deeply in church culture. And you are part of 1,000 churches with awards. There's going to be a big ceremony for the 1,000th church, and that's going to come out in the next few weeks. And there's over 2,500 churches that have registered with Eco Church. There's a lot of resources there and lots of things to do. And as I've been talking to Helen, it sounds like you're well on your way to the Silver Award as well. but it's really making that difference in thinking and action. And I've seen your gardens, your dedicated folk there, most of you there today on the Zoom, changing the ways that things have been done in the church and at home. And you've got an amazing garden for not just growing things, for biodiversity and also for rest and contemplation. So moving on to what we're going to be talking about, you're going to be talking about for the next few weeks, is the Jubilee theme. And this is a funny sort of word that it takes a while to get into your head for a different reason. So we tend to use the term Jubilee to celebrate anniversaries, but its biblical roots lie in a radical reset every 50 years. The social, economic, and ecological world rebooted is what it really means. So we're not talking about something that's necessarily easy, but we're actually talking about something that we have to act upon. The shock of coronavirus pandemic and the terrible suffering it's brought in strange ways, given us an opportunity to look at our relationships with each other, the earth, and with God. It talks about a time to rest. So God set aside the Sabbath so that the land and its inhabitants could rest and be renewed. God's people were invited to rest from their usual labour and to let the land heal and the earth repair itself, as individuals consumed less than usual. And today we need to find just and sustainable ways of living that can give the earth the rest it requires, ways that satisfy everyone with a sufficiency without destroying the ecosystems that sustain us. And you'll be thinking, yeah, actually things have been changing recently with COVID, and already we can see how the earth can recover if we allow it to rest. In Wales, of goats walking down the high street. You've heard bird song, clean water, clean air, hardly any planes in the sky. Has made a difference, and it made a difference to that Earth Overshoot Day. But as I said, that was made by disaster, the difference, not by design, and we have to start thinking about a design for the future. A time to restore. So, the BBC Extinction programme last night and earlier in this week with David Attenborough gave us a sense of urgency. In fact, it was very difficult to watch. But it did also simultaneously offer an optimistic promise that it still isn't quite too late to change things. And I guess as he's getting a little bit older, he said, "I do truly believe that together we can make a better future. I might not be here to see it, but if we make the right decisions at this critical moment, we can safeguard our planet's ecosystem." Biodiversity restoration. We need to support the UN call to safeguard 30% of the Earth as protected habitats by 2030 in order to stem the alarming rate of biodiversity. Now, that's not just only because it's to stop the biodiversity loss, but actually it's really good for the economy as well. And there are huge numbers out that show that if you do look after 30%, safeguard 30% of the Earth, it will make a difference, and it will cost less in the long term to do this. A lot of governments have signed up to it, but the UN is really, really calling for action on this. Climate restoration. You know as well as I do that this 1.5 C centigrade has been talked about, and it was enshrined in the Paris Agreement. But we really have to do everything in our capacity to limit the global average temperature rise under the threshold of 1.5. At the moment, we're not anywhere near, we're failing. But it's within a grasp, and it's in the Paris Climate Agreements, it's in all the UNFCCC, the UN climate talks. So it's possible, but it requires you and me and higher up as well. It means everybody has to do something. And the Pope just recently said we must restore with justice in mind, ensuring that those who have lived on the land for generations can regain control over its usage. Another sort of restoration, but all linked. So they've got biodiversity, climate restoration, and land restoration. The pandemic has brought us to a crossroads, it could be said. And we've got a decisive moment now, decisive moment to end some of this discussion and superfluous activities and some of the goals that we might have in life. Some of our values and connections and activities aren't life-giving. So we've got to actually examine our habits of energy use, consumption, transportation, eliminate some of the destructive ways that people are working with our economies and some of the trade that goes on, and work on nature living, life-giving ways to trade, to produce, and to transport goods. So, Julie is a reminder that more is not always better. We need to detox from travel, consumerism, busyness, and shopping. We need to take a Sabbath once a week. And let's bring our treatment of this precious earth into the centre of our life with God. So these are some of the questions I was thinking that we could look at. Different ways of changing in this challenging time, our everyday lives and connections at home, at work, and in church. So not very difficult questions, but actually when we start looking at what we do and how we do things, it gets quite personal, and we have to sort of take responsibility for what we do and the decisions and where we are at work and what differences we can make as well. These pictures are of the climate march that some of you were on in Berne. Talking about insect hotel, which I know you've got one, prayer, restoration of wild spaces. And when you do so, you start getting butterflies and all the insects back again, which are so important as pollinators. So thank you for that quick input, and it'd be great to have a discussion.
Wouldn't even be better than September 14th, and most likely they are by all objective standards. But there is a countercurrent, and exactly the ones that you alluded to this evening of water scarcity, lack of or diminishing biodiversity, climate change and all its effects. And so how do we overcome that? And I think that the only way to really do it is through education. It's I think most of us are not bad stewards by ill will. We're bad stewards by ignorance. And so I think that's where I think also churches have an opportunity and the responsibility to be educators, and how we in our daily lives, again, as voters, as investors, as consumers, as employees, as leaders in business, how we can make a difference. I don't want to monopolize here, but I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, there's a thing called profits with principles that could be put into action.
Yeah, just another startling figure that I read the other day in a book called Falter. You probably know it, Sarah. And that we have in the last 35 years, we have used more energy and natural resources in the entire history of civilization before that. And it just goes to show that we can't continue on this trajectory.
Also, you can follow that up with, I've got millions, this computer's full of other slides, but I won't bore you with them, but there's one that shows the ranking of consumption of energy by which countries. And it is by, no doubt the north of the world, not the south. And it's they in the south are actually having the most problems with all the effects of our overconsumption. That's the really difficult part.
I was really struck by what you said about how just preparing these slides, how things had even changed from last year. Several of the things you said. I mean, I think that is very, very sobering in itself. The change is happening very fast, not for the better. We need to realise that.
Yes, there's a problem that climate change is in our interests to do something about. But biodiversity affects the poor in Africa. And many of us have no contact. We don't hear about the poor in Africa. Only through the charities we support do we have this connection. And the only thing we can do is to support other charities to do the work for us, or to influence big businesses to act more humanely. There's little practical.
You used to drive along and there'd be like all these splattered insects on your windscreen. Do you remember going to journeys and you'd be scraping them off? Does it happen now?
No, it's much nicer driving without insects squashed on your windscreen.
But without those insects, the plants aren't being pollinated. Without those insects, we have a huge problem. And so biodiversity loss for us is as important. It has a different face, if you like, but it is as important as it is in Ottawa or in wherever else.
But we don't perceive it. We aren't educated to perceive it enough. This is.
Yeah. So one of the things that you could do in your biodiverse garden is you could look at, here goes, or get other people to, or children to, or young adults to look at the numbers of insects, and you will see that they will go up. They will go up because you are giving them life. And that is really important, because when you have insects, you have birds, and when you have birds, it's the whole web. Everybody eats everybody else, and it's a whole ecosystem. And we've lost so much of that. And that's the whole importance of protecting and restoring biodiversity. So it does make a difference here in Switzerland. There is an Rocha Swiss that works in meadows, looking to try and look after conserved meadows for particular sorts of animals and insects that just won't be there in the future. And that's just on our doorstep.
So as Manuel says, education is part of the key.
But we know a lot of it inside us somehow, but we just don't sort of articulate it, shall we say. We all know bees are good for the garden. Bees are pollinators, but you know, we're not really that bothered what happens to them, but it will make a difference of food, it will make a difference to all sorts of things.
That, if I can add.
I just turned on it. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Part of that, if I can add, is also eating organically. And we saw a film some years ago called More Than Honey. And they were showing evidence of these huge industrial farms in the West Coast in California for almonds and other nuts and fruits. And they spray everything and it kills the bees, and then they transfer the bees in huge trucks to pollinate the fruits and nuts, and a third of them die on the road just because they're stressed. And they take truckloads of bees from one enormous orchard to another to just pollinate. And then the bees get sick, and there's of course those diseases can be spread. And yeah, so I think buying organic and supporting smaller farms ideally would also be helpful.
Well, then they showed it, just to stay on the movie, for those of you who've not seen it, in the end they show how, in China, where the problem is so big that bees have died. They're, in some areas they're virtually extinct, where you have thousands of workers pollinating the plants with Q-tips, because there are no bees anymore to do this, or with little brushes. Yeah.
There's another interesting book called The Fate of Food, rather recently published. And she talks about conservation all over the world, different conservation projects, and also, again, how China has polluted their environment. And it's not even possible for them to have an organic farm there that would be approved in the West, because the earth is so destroyed. But yeah, she talks about climate change and also just how we can change our farming habits. We can do more with insects, more local, what is it called again? Vertical farming, so that we don't have to transport food so far, and we use less water as well. But yeah, it's quite an interesting book for those who are interested in the future of our food.
Yeah, I think, you know, we live in Switzerland, France, wherever nearby. There is a huge amount of pollution. There are microplastics in Lake Geneva, loads of them. They're in the earth. They're in our country. It's not just, you know, it's quite natural for us to say China's the big one, which they are, but actually on our doorstep there are things happening daily. So we can be part of that consumer part daily and looking at what we do and how we do it.
But we do need organizations like Rocha to help us navigate through all this, because all these, if you just take the 17 the Sustainable Development Goals, and if you look at how complex they are and how they interact, you ignore one and you ignore them all. And for any of us to see all these interdependencies and these interrelationships between any of our actions, what effects they may have, and that is for any individual. I mean, we see it maybe in, we drive our car a little less, we take more public transportation. These are the obvious ones, but there's so many more ways in which we affect our environment. And so we need experts that are able to translate all this into easy behavioral steps. And I think for these purposes, organizations like Rocha are valuable, because again, we're overwhelmed.
Yeah, we've got, I mean, I'm sure you saw this one for Lent. Ruth Valerio, she used to be a Rocha, she's now Tier Fund. Brilliant book. All the case studies are actually a Rocha, although it's printed by Tier Fund. There's other ones, Planted. This was how A Rocha Canada started, how they were planted where they are in the community. There are a lot of stuff around, but just going back to the SDGs, there are 17 of these goals that we're all working towards, trying to make a difference by 2030. And 14 out of 17 have biodiversity indicators in. That's how important the biodiversity part is. There is a biodiversity on its own, but they've all got that as well.
I think one of the things that struck me just in talking to you and what your presentation today is how all these things kind of are interrelated, which is what Manuel just said. I mean, sometimes we divide them up. You know, we think about climate change, or we're really concerned about that, but we're not that bothered about biodiversity or other. But actually, they're all these things are related, and we need to kind of try and be concerned about all of them.
Yeah, trouble is, if you get very concerned, you'd end up putting your head in a bag and hiding. So that's the thing. You've got to be able to do what you can, and there is hope.
Yeah.
Further down that line, I'm just thinking of something Helen said in sermon, I think yesterday, about how you know, the challenge of promoting awareness of these things in the life of the church. Helen talked about the eco-Pharisaism, you know, how we can sort of, you know, there are various difficulties in moving forward. I mean, probably by definition, the fact that we've come to listen to you means that we're all persuaded of the importance of these things. And I'm wondering whether a Rocha or any of the other organizations that you're familiar with, Sarah, have a kind of, perhaps just a kind of toolkit for how in a local church you can, you know, approach folding these kind of issues into the regular life of a congregation. I mean, whether there are some churches which have been particularly effective at, you know, in a sustainable way, just sort of building these things into the life of the church. Because, I mean, as you were saying, there are so many issues, it can be overwhelming to start to think about. And people can just say, well, I can't live without my car, I can't do this, I can't do the other. But how in a realistic way can a church, I mean, I think the encouraging thing about St Ursula's is that there's clearly a kind of critical mass of commitment. And there may be I mean, who knows? There may be some people on the fringes thinking, "Ah, this is all nonsense. I don't believe it." But you don't tend to hear that. So there's there's a lot of goodwill. Helen often preaches about the environment. Our reader preached a great sermon about the environment the other day. How do we, you know, are there kind of just sort of, guys, maybe I'm asking a basic question to which you and Helen and others already.
I think in the Eco Church information, that page I actually showed you on as part of that slide, lots of colours on it, there are lots of resources linked to that and examples of different places. And I think the problem is that there are some overall things that we can all do, but quite a lot of it's individual as to where you are. They, you know, for a church, even its church building, whether you own it or you don't, whether it's, you know, got so many bits of paper on that you can't do anything about it and you can't change whatever. So a building project has to be because Geneva says so. It's not because you want to do it, whatever. In a congregation, it really depends on, you know, you're very fortunate you have eco-friendly leadership. A lot of churches don't.
Yeah. So
I think some of this, like this Ruth Valerio book that I showed, I can give you the ticket to that, has some, it was a Lent course, in fact, which had different steps in it, which has a lot to do with environment. There is a lot of stuff out there, but there isn't just one guide. And I think coming back to the Jubilee theme in the Bible, that thing about rest and restoration and thinking about things and not consuming as much, in that, you know, we can't take every 50 years. We haven't got 50 years. But that whole idea of how to do things, I think we have to look at it individually. That's why my questions were individually, what can we do? Because what people see is what we do, what we eat, where we go, what we wear, what we drive, what we talk about. You know, I mean, it's a gospel issue. It's absolutely totally interwoven with being a Christian. So I would find out some different things, but there's no one place to go for all this sort of stuff.
But I do think there are practical ways, again, to come back to the different roles that we play in society, and if we play those roles in a conscious way and in a way that is ecologically and socially mindful, again, as employees, at least those of us who are still employed, unlike me, who are not retired yet, but also as investors, how we invest in our pension funds, how we work as business leaders, how we act as consumers, as voters. There are things we can do, but the first thing is awareness. We need to know what practical measures that we can take in these different functions and roles that we exercise in society, and I think but then we can make a difference. We can demand a difference, and that's actually what's happening today. Businesses, publicly traded companies, with a few exceptions, they can't really afford. I mean, a lot of it is greenwashing or whatever you want to call it, but at least they talk the talk, and you know, if their feet are held to the fire, they also have to walk the walk, and I think that is our responsibility as a church, but also in these different functions that I mentioned, to make sure that happens, and then we can do make a difference, even as individual citizens.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that thought as well, because at our business school, you know, we're getting more focused on impact investment now. At one time, it was all about greenwashing, but I really think it does make a difference. Now, a lot of our young people are joining these impact hubs. There are about 9 or 10 in Switzerland. There's an excellent, or a few in Zurich, and they're really focused on the SDGs. And they're startups. Those startups that are coming up are really, you know, focused on sustainable investment. So it's not just about financial returns, it's actually about societal value and about value for the environment. And I think young people are picking up on this. So it comes back to the point that I think Manuel and you made, Sarah, that education is crucial, and we can change people's mindsets through that. And it's about what we consume, but it's also about, you know, which companies we support. So I think there's a lot of things we can do in quite significant ways.
You're right, Peter. Impact investments today are driven not entirely, but in large measure by millennials, and because they are susceptible to the message of stewardship.
Many people who are millennials don't own cars in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a whole big change. Yeah.
Apropos education, I have a friend in Washington, D.C. who started a blog. And she had started a farm in Indonesia, and that would train local orphans how to farm sustainably, and then give them something to do afterwards, give them a small plot of land. And so she started a blog, and she sends out every week something that we can do to make a difference. So use a bar of soap instead of liquid soap. One of the things I suggested to her too is, none of us think about it, but when we surf on the internet, how much energy we're using. What is it again? We use an incredible amount of energy just shopping on the internet, surfing on the internet.
Yeah, already today the energy that is being used to power our IT demands, including cloud computing and these kind of things, is already higher than all air traffic combined in the world. And in 10 years, it will have surpassed all traffic, vehicular traffic on Earth and aviation. But just that the energy used for that is going to be higher than any kind of transportation that we use. And of course, that's something that we don't think about. And when we download videos, when we watch movies on the internet, the energy it uses, and a lot of this energy, of course, is not produced in a sustainable way. It comes from coal-fired plants. It comes from fossil fuel burning plants. And so that's what I mean by ignorance. A lot of young people, they would like to do the same thing. They don't go to Barcelona for on a weekend trip, but they don't realize how much they contribute to CO2 emissions by just downloading films and watching YouTube videos.
We have the luxury in Switzerland of being able to choose where our electricity comes from, and we can at least have our own green electricity. Would be a decision that each household makes. And there are steps along the way that we can do. And I think the trouble is, I gave you lots of high level, huge things, but we really have to get down to the nuts and bolts of our everyday life as well.
What Chris just said about having this blog, I mean, we do have the eco tips that Hector puts out in church. We have, I mean, I don't know how much people take note of those, but they're just like you said about using a bar of soap and just like that. Maybe we should raise the profile of that a bit more, encourage one another. The small things, but if we all do small things, that's a good thing. And if some of the things we do are in our individual lives, what we can do things as a church, but we can also hopefully encourage one another to do the things in our individual lives. We just need a kind of climate that a culture that sort of shares ideas and talks about things and prompts one another and encourages one another. Not to make one another feel guilty, as I was saying yesterday, to sort of encourage to make good decisions. We just need that kind of culture, I think.
Yeah, so maybe to think about how to encourage that exchange more.
Yeah. I mean, there are churches that have like a creation care group, or whatever you want to call it, whatever, that they share recipes of, what to do with the 5 billion marrows you've grown, or they swap their marrow for an aubergine, or they have a system, but all sorts of things that can be brought in. It's got a garden, or something, it's got a balcony, and and including the young people.
It would be nice if there was some mechanism for them to share these ideas with other churches as well.
Yes.
And communication is part of the problem that we live in our own little little boxes.
Well, if you got in touch with Revd, for example, they are doing loads of stuff, and they're just up the road, and they're a nice grouping in Revd.
That's a good idea.
National director of a Rocha Swiss goes to Vevey. She was born in Bath in England, and then at the age of 5 she went to live in France, and now she's married a Swiss, so but she's fluent in English and brilliant. So Ursula would be gladly things,
Yeah, I think that's good to share ideas and yeah. I mean, one thing I'm sure there's a lot of churches are doing, but one thing we've talked about just recently on the council is about the initiative about encouraging Swiss businesses to be responsible in the way that they relate to their workers and care for the environment, and so things like that campaign. So I haven't seen the banner yet, Sue, or we got the banners to put up? We haven't put it up yet, have we?
Correct. I spoke to Maria this morning. I think the banners are in her office. I left them there, so I asked her to put them up tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
But really, we should use some of those wire things because some people who don't agree with this might take them down. And I don't know if we've got any of those wire things that that you close on themselves, and I think they're more difficult to then take
off. Yeah.
Although people could cut the banner off if they really wanted to do so, I suppose it doesn't really make that much difference. But I have heard about, and one of our neighbours, their banner disappears all the time. So
be more intimidated taking one from a church.
I doubt it.
Well, maybe they take it so they can put it in their own garden.
Well, maybe.
Positive thought.
So Cecily, Alison, Esther, do you have any thoughts to share or questions?
Well, what we can do in the church garden, we'll try to for more biodiversity. When I see the films that Sarah showed, we're just little fish in the sea. We've got to know. I think we all need ideas of how to start. Yeah, on a small scale, and listening to what everybody's saying. We can sort of spread the word by doing. Whether we buy our not our other, or even in church, if we have a bar of soap in the cloakrooms there and not the bottle, it's whether we have a garden that well, I certainly hope that the garden does bring in more insects with what we're doing there. That's our aim. It's. And apart from collecting money and supporting, even here I live in Hildesheim in Thun, and just it was a year back now, we went to a dinner and it was raising money, and a guy came, I can't remember which country it was, but he'd actually also started off by raising money and going, I think, with 10,000 francs to buy trees, and he gave the local people in Africa somewhere and showed them how to plant their trees. And now there's you most probably know it, Sarah. I can't find the leaflets, but it's an enormous space now that they've planted with trees, and if they show interest, they got a donkey, and but they had to look after the donkey as well as the tree. It is all the things, but for us here, what can we do other than financial? That sort of thing.
Planting trees, leaving a bit of the garden to wildlife, not mowing it.
Well, we've got trees.
Planting, offsetting. So if you are travelling, if you are consuming electricity on the internet, you can offset it, and that money will go to plant trees in places of Ghana and everywhere else. We have Climate Stewards, which is a Rocha organisation that does exactly that. Solar cooking stoves in Peru and all sorts of things to help out. The biosand water filters, although it sounds very development orientated, it's actually saving enormous amount of wood being cut down for boiling water. There's all sorts of
locals in where they are. It's not what we're actually, we have solar panels on our roof here that obviously saves electricity and gives us hot water. And
I think it'd be great if you actually made an inventory of all the things you are doing, and you'd be really surprised that you're doing loads of really good things. But if you did an inventory of what all you were doing, from what I've heard, little snippets, you know, you could learn from each other even, that you don't even know. Pump, here goes, I pump water out of my bath, out the window, down into a big blue container, and then I water my garden with it, because rainwater harvesting doesn't work if you haven't got any rain. You know, you can do all sorts of things, but you know, I don't go telling people that, but you know, surely you're all doing different things, and you can make a list, and it's much easier to say, we're doing this, so please could you do something, rather than just pointing a finger and say you're doing something wrong.
Do it by example.
Do it by saying we do this. In a lot of places nowadays do it social, economic, biodiversity. This is what we do, and as an example, we would like, you know, look, you can see that it's possible, and we'll help you, or whatever.
But that's a nice idea. We could have a sort of a kind of share ideas kind of magazine or blog or little videos or something. Put it all together and see what different people are doing and learn from one another. And
the children will be doing stuff in school. But perhaps if you're older than little children age now, you know, you won't be hearing about. You know, there's all sorts of things going on.
We tell our neighbors to take shorter showers. We can't lead by example there, because they're not in the shower with us when we take our short shower.
You know.
But we also do our own.
Mind you, they were renters. They were American neighbors. And they're teenagers who used a lot of water.
That's right. Anyway.
Yeah, we don't have to go to the sort of Honduran example when I used to have literally a cup, and you had to that was
your cup. Yeah.
To wash in a cup. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And a cup of water, never leave the water on while you're cleaning your teeth. Do it from a cup. You know, that's what we have to do in these countries. Why don't we? Because we have water coming out of our taps. But it's always.
I think there are signs of hope. You know, when I grew up, we had these beautiful meadows, and they were full of flowers and all different plants, a lot of diversity, you know. And then the farmers started to put this liquid manure on the meadows, and all these flowers died because the soil was too rich for them. And I always thought that was a shame, even though there are some farmers who still keep their meadows, you know, on a natural level, so they can have this diversity. But now, lately, I have seen this year in several communities that they have planted a mixture of flowers and plants along their roads, the edges of their roads, and they're just beautiful. And it's one way you can attract insects, you know, and do something for the environment. And even in a small way, my sister gave all of our siblings a little packet of seeds that you could put in a you know, window box or something. And I did that, and it was amazing, the plants that came up. And sure enough, the bees came, the wild bees mostly, and it was just a joy to see this happen, because usually unless you really go out and sit in nature somewhere, you don't have an opportunity to see this. And I think it's encouraging, and it brings joy too.
I think it is encouraging that when we look around just in our own areas where we live, that, as Esther says, that balconies used to just have geraniums on them, and you see people growing all sorts of things, and you see little corners in apartment blocks where people, even during the lockdown, that people began to think more about their environment, and began what was a barren area have made this into quite a productive little area where you can imagine that the bees and the insects will be coming back. And I think that's encouraging, that through COVID, that even that has had a positive influence on people. Sometimes areas in Switzerland.
There is Rocha Swiss have got a new program of helping people have biodiverse gardens in Switzerland, or balconies, what to grow. You can get in touch with them. They're very nice. Gabrielle is the girl there. She speaks English too. Though they're French sort of mostly, but they all sort of speak English as well. So they're doing a lot to make a difference. And the whole idea is, like we have a Rocha in the USA, is they're trying to make biodiversity corridors. So instead of so you get you and then your neighbours and then somebody else, and you get a whole long area, which makes a huge difference to how animals and insects and birds can go sort of in a whole area rather than so scattered everywhere. They've actually taken it one by one in little neighbourhoods and to try and do things. You can do it greening balconies with friends and neighbours, a bit like your seeds that you got from family. You can make a difference. And I think people being connected to and seeing and caring and nurturing for something tiny will make them want to care and nurture for the bigger picture as well. But at this time of year, it's bulbs, I'm sorry. So you could put some bulbs in, hyacinths at Christmas or whatever. That's what a lot of churches are doing with their Sunday schools, planting bulbs.
I like the idea of you talking about, involving the children. I mean, we've got so much happening with the children at the moment, but getting them to count, how many kind of insects, and then over a period of time, if we get more insects, that type of thing, because I think that's a fun thing, that's an educational thing, that'd be a good thing to do. Who eats what insect, which birds eat whatever one they've seen, and then, you could do a sort of a whole thing, couldn't you? And in the insect hotel, which insects live in which bit, the bamboo bits or the terracotta bits or the hay bits, because each part of an insect hotel has different areas for different insects. Holy Trinity's Geneva's just got permission from Geneva Canton to put a hotel for insects up. I'm yet to find out where they want it to be put. That's the problem. It has to be in a particular place for the sun. If it's put around the corner, it will look decorative, but it won't work. So there's a bit of dialogue that's got to go on. But influence your ville, your canton, your town, your city.
An insect hotel is what we still need, because the ones we had fell apart.
Yeah, they weren't in the right place anyway. They have to be somewhere sunny and fixed to something solid.
And they have to be made very, very strongly. Like a carpenter sort of person making them.
Okay.
Sort of intergeneration. You've got an older person doing all the carpentry and the kids doing the different bits. There's one in Nyon that's about 2 meters tall and about 1 meter wide, with all the different and all the little arrows of who lives where and what and they eat and everything. Quite amazing. Okay, that was a whole ville, a whole town, but you could have one on a smaller scale, and the children can sort of learn a bit about why you're doing it.
Because we at one point in time, but I think you need to be careful when you're constructing an insect hotel that you're doing it the right way.
Exactly.
Yes, it has to point in so that it's in with a sunny bit where they're coming in at night, because they're not going to come in the shade.
But also the materials you use, apparently they might look nice, but they're useless. The insects are not going to come.
You have to look at what sort of hay they would want, or what sort, what size bamboo little things are that you use. It's a bit of research, really. Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether there's other. I mean, we've talked about the garden and biodiversity and education and tips and trying to share individual ideas. I'm just wondering if there's other things that we can do sort of as a church. I think one of the things we talked about for ideas, maybe was it last year, Hector and the Eco Group, was things like car sharing in coming to church, or encouraging people to walk, but if people do have to come by car, trying to share lifts and work. But it's quite how to organise that, to have to know where people live, and how it's kind of a bit of a bigger project. But I think that would be also something that we could maybe try and do.
You could start with one Sunday a year of car sharing. You don't have to start with trying to set up a whole system. Just do once a year.
We manage it in Thun.
You manage it. It's a bit more manageable, isn't it? And you all live very near to each other.
It would be very nice to find a church that had succeeded in persuading its congregation to come to church by public transport or by car sharing.
Again,
to find out how they've done it.
Vevey does only public transport to a church one day a year, and they managed it.
Be a challenge.
Yeah. Vevey have a more favourable geographical location than Berne.
Do they? But people come from miles to go there. The villages, mountains, and all over the place.
And did that have a carry-on?
By any means.
Did that have a carry-on effect when people realised it was more doable than they had? Did some people realise?
Yes.
That's the hope, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, one day a year we could manage it.
Yeah, if you just do
it might make a difference.
A small start.
Yeah.
That would be a good idea.
Okay.
I think there's a day when there's no car Sunday or something. Is that in Berne?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do it that day.
Right. Is there a no car day? I don't know when that is.
There is, yes.
Yeah.
When is that?
In Kirchenfeld.
Yes, but it's just local regions, isn't it?
It's a very strong deterrent to people, but the trouble is that they're good at exercising their ingenuity to find ways around the ban on cars, and it's a question of how to educate them not to be that way inclined.
But you can have some sort of competition in the Sunday school or whatever it's called, about who came how and where and how long it took, and you can do something like that, or art competition related to something. There's all sorts of ways you can do things.
Yes. It's a question of how to persuade the old as well as the young, really.
Well, I have to say, in most NGOs and things, they've probably given up with the old and they're having to go for the young. Just because of making a difference, because it's the young who are keen, they understand, they can see it's their world in the future that everybody else has made a mess of, they're going to inherit, and but wouldn't it be lovely to have older people being the example they can follow?
Yeah.
That would be my dream.
It would.
Yeah, younger people are naturally idealistic, at least most of them. So I think that's a good age to try to get to them and get these messages across. But to David's point, I think it's true. If it can be done once, it could be done several times, unless everybody comes away with the experience saying I'll never do that again. But which
hopefully not.
But again, if it's feasible and it can be done, then it may have a repetition effect.
Yeah.
I'll make the muffins. If people show a tram ticket, they get a muffin.
Jolly and corruption, jolly good.
Bribery.
That's right, exactly. No corruption works. Messages, right?
On the older part of the congregation and people, I'm getting there as well. When I talked to my mum about how things were, she's 86. She's never used tea bags. She's only ever used loose leaf tea. She's never had to have the thing about, oh my goodness, has the tea bag got any plastic in it or whatever. She's never even gone there. So many things we can learn from people who have done something all their lives that is normal, that we haven't really thought about necessarily.
One of the simple ones is to have your carrier bag that you reuse, isn't it?
And all the little bags for the vegetables.
Yeah.
Stickers
or even a shopping bag. You have a shopping bag that is your shopping bag. It's not always ever a Migros bag or a Co-op. They're also little steps, aren't they? But
yeah.
I don't even put my vegetables in bags now. I weigh them and stick
the sticker on it. Yeah.
I stick the thing on my shopping bag. And then she has to just read it down.
I stick it on the carrot or whatever it is, rather than put it in a bag.
They come off.
I have a little bag, I put it in.
Sometimes.
Little bags, within bags, yeah. I mean, but those are the sort of things that you can make fun for people, and, you know, some people don't know you can get little bags to put little bags in and things that are, you know, eco-friendly or whatever. I carry my own little cup that flattens, and then you can bring it up again, that you fill it the shop or something, you know.
We had those in the 60s.
You know,
they're still around.
You can get those for the yeah.
I use the string bag for my vegetables, and I've got a little clip on the side with paper, and I put the stickers on that, because they like to see that you've got the amount of stickers and the amount of different vegetables or fruit in your bag in the supermarket.
Yeah,
it's a really good idea.
How about when you go to a supermarket and I know they've done it at some Swiss churches, and that you've got everything's covered in so much packaging, and you unload all the packaging at the till and leave it there.
Leave it.
A bit radical. I mean, some people do that as well.
Well, there are places just after the till where you can leave the packaging. You know,
or you can go to places that only don't have packaging.
Yeah, the unpacked places.
You could go to a farm shop. There's plenty around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are ways of doing things that you, and then that's a positive. You are cutting down on packaging. You just say it. You know, this church congregation is trying to cut down on packaging. It is trying. You know, well, nobody's going to succeed 100%. And life is a compromise. Somebody told me once, and I'm afraid it is. All these little small things, and you add them all up with what you're doing even here, is enormous, huge long list.
Can I just ask? I mean, I've got lots of prompts here for things at an individual level, with soap and shopping things and so on. I'm just in the back of my mind, there's sort of questions going on, but you know, there's sort of things we can do corporately, or you know, as a body, or you know, whether you know, as a church, are there things for which we have sort of muscle, we have capacity? I mean, I'm sure Hector and Helen and others have thought about this already, but I mean, there are perhaps obvious things like what we, you know, which electricity company we use or what we invest in. But I'm also thinking, I mean, are there, I get things from some environmental organizations, and I hardly ever have time to attend them, but, you know, asking you to support a particular campaign or whatever. And strikingly, I wanted to ask you about this. One recently was from it was something like Save the, you know, sort of Friends of the Earth or something, asking to write a letter and to the Church of England to complain about their policy around forestry. So that was quite challenging. But so I also wondered what you think the policy of the church, you know, the church, the wider church to which we belong, thinking bigger, is that doing well? Certainly Friends of the Earth didn't seem to think so. And they said they had a very evasive answer from the Church of England about these things. So
well, it's a huge organisation, okay? And it's got a lot of stuff from many, many, many years of doing things in particular ways, like we all have. And so it's disinvested in all of its sort of coal and oil stuff, which has taken years to do. And they would only have done it if they hadn't been made to do it, in all honesty, by church people like us. Saying, hey, what are you doing? So they've managed that, which is brilliant. And but there will be other things in their portfolios that they will have to go one by one, a bit like you doing eco church awards, you know, oh my goodness, now this, you know, because it's such a complicated system. And it's a bit like you were saying, you know, hold people's feet to the fire. I would only ever do something if I'd really looked into what on earth they were saying first, double checked, you know, just because it came through the letterbox from Friends of the Earth, it might not necessarily be something you'd want to look at. But I would approach the diocese, and I'm sure, you know, there are connections, and I'd double check, you know, I would look at some things, but only choose a few things, because there are so many things you can have a campaign about.
Does a Rocha put out suggestions for campaigns to support?
No, like that advocacy, that the Ghana ones are like, they come to us, unfortunately, sometimes, which is good. We aren't sort of a huge campaigning organisation. We haven't got the capacity for it.
Okay.
We go to the climate COPs. We go there. So I was in Paris in 21, and then, you know, all over these places. We are involved in the UN Faith Initiative. I do all those UN stuff that you can belong to and do stuff. But I think for influencing the Church of England, there is a environment network group. They've actually got a proper committee of, you know, Bishop and a load of other ones. It would be interesting to ask the questions, interesting to see what they say. There's no harm in asking. The thing is, you have to make sure that you're asking from a place that you're doing as well.
Yeah.
That's where you know, you've got to, yeah. But it is our money. It is the Church of England. Yeah, absolutely.
It's very helpful. Thank you.
But always point the finger at a church, much easier than something else.
It's us.
True.
Good.
I think we're sort of about had it by now, haven't we? I can hear the cup of tea calling. Sarah, a cup of tea. You've got my email somewhere. Get in touch. I'd be very happy to have a chat with anybody, and I can, you know, send you bits and bobs and things that come up. And it's lovely meeting you all. I've met some of you before, and keeping in contact over the years, many years. I've been in the chaplaincy sort of arena for about 20 years now, so I know quite a lot of people. So and it's this connectedness. I think, you know, 1 and 1 makes 3, to tell the truth, and different churches getting together and changing ideas. When we're allowed to visit and move around and diddly dum, hey, get one group, you go there, they come to see you, you know, that's the sort of way to do things.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. I think we should get connectivity on our own chaplaincy, but also we can learn from some of the others. I think would be good.
And they can learn from you, you know, don't be what you do.
Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful to have you, Sarah, with us, and it's been a really stimulating discussion and lots of things for us to think further about. And we've got people here from the eco group, got people from the gardening group, got here from the charity group. So, you know, there's several networks already here, and we hope to involve a lot more people in the church as well. And so, yeah, I mean, although there's been the big issues, I found it encouraging this evening just to think that we can try and do something.
Every little helps. I think that's where we have to be. That's otherwise we would just, you know, drown in despair, and sorrow. There is hope, and as Christians we have a God. That's where our hope is. Because so that's it's our duty and our love for the earth that we're doing these things for.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. So thank you for coming.